Greetings, friends. Today is August 6th, 2019, and today marks the 54th anniversary of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. I'd like to commemorate this important piece of legislation with a reading from a classic of history. The 1965 Act would be passed after another titanic struggle in which, with men and women and children, many children, being beaten in Selma on their way to the Edmund Pettus Bridge, singing "We Shall Overcome," as they marched into tear gas and bully clubs and bullwhips. Lyndon Johnson went before Congress and said, "We shall overcome," thereby adopting the civil rights rallying cry as his own. When Martin Luther King, watching the speech on television in Selma, heard Johnson say that, he began to cry, the first time his assistants had ever seen him cry. In 1965, Johnson was able to deploy from the Oval Office more weapons than he had had available to him the year before. James Farmer, sitting beside the president as he used the telephone, heard him cajoling, threatening, everything else, whatever was necessary, to get the bill passed. To bring Black Americans more fully into the political system, he had to break the power of the South in the Senate, and he broke it. It was Abraham Lincoln who struck off the chains of Black Americans, but it was Lyndon Johnson who led them into voting booths, closed democracy's sacred curtain behind them, placed their hands upon the lever that gave them a hold on their own destiny, made them at last and forever a true part of American political life. How true a part? 43 years later, a mere blink of history's eye, a Black American, Barack Obama, was sitting behind the desk in the Oval Office. The 1964 Civil Rights Act and the 1965 Voting Rights Act would not be Lyndon Johnson's only victories in the fight for social justice. Other bills passed during his administration made strides towards ending discrimination in public accommodation, in education, employment, even in private housing. Almost a century after Abraham Lincoln had freed Black men and women from slavery, Black men and women and Mexican-American men and women, and indeed most Americans of color, still did not enjoy many of the rights which America supposedly granted its citizens. It was Lyndon Johnson who gave them those rights. Lincoln had been president during the 19th century. During the 20th century, of all its 17 American presidents, Lyndon Baines Johnson was the greatest champion that Black Americans and Mexican Americans, and indeed all Americans of color, had in the White House, the greatest champion that they had in all the halls of government. With the single exception of Lincoln, he was the greatest champion with a white skin that they had in the history of the Republic. He was to become the lawmaker for the poor and the downtrodden and the oppressed. He was to be the bearer of at least a measure of social justice to those to whom social justice had so long been denied, the restorer of at least a measure of dignity to those who so desperately needed to be given some dignity, the redeemer of the promises made to them by America. It is time to write it in the books of law. By the time Lyndon Johnson left office, he had done a lot of writing in those books, had become, above all presidents save Lincoln, the codifier of compassion, the president who wrote mercy and justice into the statute books by which America was governed. And as president, he had begun to do that writing, had taken a small but crucial, ineluctable first step towards breaking the century-old barriers that, at the time he took office, still stood against civil rights on Capitol Hill. With that telephone call he made to Representative Bolling on December 2nd, 1963, with the decision he had made so early in his presidency to support the discharge position, with that decision he had made when he realized that only one lever was available to him, to lean into it with all his might.